It started with a single breath, a quiet pause in an interview that the world had been waiting for. Meghan Markle, now 44, leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly. The cameras caught everything. The flicker in her eyes, the moment of hesitation, the breath that signaled something enormous was about to break. Then she said it. Words that would echo through royal corridors, tabloids, and living rooms across the world. I lied for 6 years. Archie wasn't born the way everyone believed. For a second, no one moved. The interviewer froze, unsure whether to speak or to let the silence stretch. The audience watching at home blinked, mouths open, waiting for the next sentence. 6 years of speculation, conspiracy theories, and denial suddenly collided into one shattering confession. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But how did we get here? How did one woman, once hailed as the fresh, modern face of the British monarchy, end up sitting beneath studio lights, admitting that one of the greatest royal secrets of the modern era was real all along? The story of Meghan Markle's journey from beloved Duchess to global controversy is one that's been told and retold, twisted and reshaped. But never, not until now, with her own confirmation. And this confession didn't come out of nowhere. It came after a chain of events so shocking, so deeply buried within royal protocol and private agreements, that even those closest to the palace had no idea how deep it really went. Let's rewind. Back to the spring of 2019, a time when the world was still in love with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Their royal wedding had been a fairy tale broadcast to millions. Meghan's hand resting gently on her baby bump had become a symbol of new beginnings, a modern, diverse, hopeful future for the monarchy. But behind the smiles, something wasn't right. There were inconsistencies. One so small that most people overlooked them at first. Hospital details that didn't add up. Conflicting birth certificate information. Photos that seemed out of sequence. Even royal correspondents who'd covered dozens of births within the family whispered privately that something about the Sussex baby announcement felt different. And yet, anyone who dared question it was instantly silenced. Labeled cruel, conspiratorial, or worse. The royal machine, fueled by publicists, legal teams, and the couple's global supporters, shut down every rumor, every curious voice, every hint that the truth might not align with the carefully polished narrative. But the truth has a strange way of surviving. Even when it's buried beneath royal walls, NDAs, and contracts worth millions. It lingers. It waits. And sometimes, it explodes in the most unexpected way. For 6 years, Meghan kept up the act. She smiled for cameras, gave carefully crafted interviews, and released documentaries that portrayed her as both victim and warrior. And yet, even those closest to her began to sense that there was something deeper gnawing beneath the surface, an unease she couldn't quite mask. Was it guilt, fear, or something else entirely? To understand why this confession matters, and why it's shaking the foundation of everything we thought we knew, we have to look at the years between the lines. The unspoken truths, the decisions made behind closed doors, and the powerful people who ensured silence reigned. In the early days of her pregnancy announcement, Meghan was glowing. Cameras followed her every step, from royal engagements to charity appearances, where she cradled her bump with the same hand motion that tabloids later called the Markle cradle. It became her signature, a gesture repeated so often that it sparked both admiration and ridicule. But what most didn't know was that this gesture wasn't just instinct. It was rehearsed, intentional, part of a larger illusion. Why? Because at that time, Meghan was facing the biggest challenge of her royal life. She had built her image around authenticity, compassion, and motherhood. The idea that she couldn't conceive naturally or didn't want to go through the royal hospital birth tradition would have shattered that image overnight. So, according to insiders, a plan was made. A quiet, carefully orchestrated plan that only a handful of people would ever know about. The palace knew something was off. The courtiers who managed royal scheduling noticed that Meghan's due date kept shifting. Medical staff noticed inconsistencies in protocol. And yet, no one spoke publicly. Why? Because this wasn't just about Meghan. This was about the crown, about image, about the fragile balance of trust between monarchy and the people who keep it alive. Then came the photos. Remember that famous picture of Harry and Meghan introducing Archie to the world? The one in St. George's Hall, Windsor Castle, where Meghan's face seemed both radiant and strangely detached. Some say that was the first clue. Observers noticed that the baby appeared older than expected, his weight and features more developed than those of a newborn only 2 days old. It sparked whispers that perhaps the photo was taken days, maybe even weeks, after Archie's real birth. At the time, palace officials dismissed it as internet nonsense. But now, after Meghan's own words, that image takes on a chilling new meaning. What was she hiding? And more importantly, why did she hide it for so long? The answer isn't simple. It's tangled in layers of ambition, fear, and image. Meghan's entry into the royal family had been explosive from the start. A Hollywood actress walking into an institution built on centuries of tradition. She wanted to rewrite what it meant to be royal. And for a while, it worked. The public adored her. But the pressure to perform, to be perfect, to fulfill every royal expectation, while also maintaining her independence, created cracks no one could see at first. Then came the Netflix deal, the Oprah interview, the Spotify fallout, and the near collapse of their public image. Each revelation, each scandal, chipped away at the once gleaming Sussex brand. And it's here, at the intersection of desperation and truth, that Meghan's confession finds its power. Because this wasn't just an apology. It was a revelation that redefined everything. For 6 years, she denied, deflected, and dismissed the rumors that Archie had been born via surrogacy. She called it insulting and cruel. But deep down, she knew the day would come when the secret would no longer stay hidden. And as she faced mounting legal and media pressure, especially from sources investigating inconsistencies in birth records, the weight became unbearable. In that now infamous interview, she admitted that the fear of public humiliation, of being seen as a fraud, had driven her to lie. "I didn't want to be seen as broken," she said softly. "I wanted to be seen as whole, like every other mother who holds her baby for the first time." Those words, raw, vulnerable, devastating, hit like a thunderclap. But what's even more shocking is what followed. Because her confession didn't end there. It hinted at something darker, something far beyond a secret birth arrangement. Something that could expose a deeper layer of manipulation, not just from Meghan, but from the system around her. And that's where our story begins. Because this isn't just about surrogacy. It's about betrayal, control, and a royal cover-up that stretches across continents and contracts. It's about the illusion of transparency in an age where image means everything. It's about how far people will go to protect a lie, and how one woman, at 44, finally decided to break free from it. But before we dive into the confession itself, and what it reveals about the royal household's darkest operations, we need to revisit the early signs. The moments when the truth almost slipped out, the friends who tried to warn her, the doctors who disappeared from public records, and the anonymous midwife who once said, "That baby didn't come from Windsor." Because as much as Meghan's words have shocked the world, the real story is just beginning. And when you hear what forced her to finally speak out, and who tried to stop her from doing it, you'll understand why this confession is being called the most explosive royal revelation since Diana. The cameras may have stopped rolling after her words, but behind the scenes, the fallout had only just begun. Because the truth wasn't just about Archie. It was about everything that came after. And what came next would change everything. The story begins long before the cameras flashed, long before the fairy tale wedding that captivated the world. To understand why Meghan Markle's revelation about Archie is so explosive, we need to go back, not just to 2018, when she first appeared on the royal stage, but to the private, unseen moments that shaped her decisions and set the stage for a secret that would remain hidden for 6 years. Imagine this, a young actress, accustomed to Hollywood lights and script approval, suddenly thrust into a palace where every move is monitored, every word analyzed, and every smile dissected. Meghan knew she was stepping into a world of centuries-old protocol, where tradition often trumped personal freedom. She had a vision, a modernized monarchy, a royal role that allowed her independence and voice. But the reality was harsher than she ever imagined. Within weeks of engagement, whispers began. Royal insiders noticed Meghan's intense need for control over her image, her schedule, and even the small details of her personal life. These weren't mere diva tendencies. They were survival mechanisms. The palace had a way of slowly eroding individuality, and she sensed it. At the same time, she was still navigating Hollywood's fast-paced, cutthroat environment. There was a dual pressure to maintain her career credibility while becoming the world's most scrutinized royal. Could she do both? That question would follow her for years. And then came the first challenge, the pregnancy rumors. The media speculated endlessly. Some sources claimed she was pregnant as early as the engagement announcement. Others suggested infertility issues, whispers that Meghan might struggle to conceive. It was a minefield. Every rumor threatened to undermine the image she was cultivating, that of a strong, independent duchess who could thrive in an ancient institution without losing herself. The palace, as always, acted quietly. Courtiers and advisors attempted to manage the narrative, crafting statements, organizing appearances, and subtly guiding the public's perception. But Meghan was already taking matters into her own hands. She understood the power of optics. A carefully positioned photo here, a well-timed engagement there. Every gesture, every hand placement, every smile was deliberate. Even the way she cradled her baby bump became iconic. It was affection, yes, but also a tool of control. To the public, it was warmth and maternal instinct. To insiders, it was signaling that Meghan was actively shaping her story, preempting rumors, controlling the narrative before the palace could intervene. And yet, not all of her moves were successful. Some were risky. One anecdote that never left palace whispers involves an early ultrasound photo. According to unnamed insiders, the image was intentionally released, but it contained discrepancies. Dates didn't match up. Gestational markers seemed off. To anyone analyzing it carefully, something didn't line up. But the palace was hesitant to speak publicly. Why? Because revealing the truth, whatever that truth was, could spark an international scandal. And so, the image circulated with quiet approval, leaving the media to speculate endlessly, fueling theories that would persist for years. Meanwhile, Meghan's relationship with the royal press began to shift. Initially charming and cooperative, she grew wary. She saw firsthand how quickly favorable coverage could turn into malicious narrative. She read stories suggesting she was manipulative, self-centered, even unfit for royal duties. Every article was a reminder. In the palace, perception was reality. She needed a strategy, not just to survive, but to protect her family, and one day, protect Archie. Then there was Prince Harry. While deeply devoted to Meghan, he was also caught between loyalty to her and allegiance to the monarchy. Harry understood that his own position could be jeopardized if the public narrative turned against Meghan. In private, he often expressed frustration at palace rules he found outdated or suffocating. Together, they began envisioning a life not just within the monarchy, but beyond it, a life that allowed them independence, security, and control over their personal narrative. The concept of surrogacy, at this point, wasn't even in the public conversation. But in private, discussions about alternatives to a traditional royal birth began to emerge, options that would allow them to preserve privacy and control should they need it. And this brings us to a pivotal moment, one that very few know about. According to insider whispers, there was a confidential meeting involving Meghan, Harry, and a small circle of advisors. The topic was delicate: fertility challenges, timing, and the feasibility of using a surrogate without disrupting royal protocol or public perception. The conversation was reportedly tense, filled with emotional spikes, fears, and hypothetical scenarios. No decisions were made immediately, but the seed was planted, a seed that, 6 years later, would grow into the revelation the world is only now hearing. At the same time, Meghan was already navigating legal and media constraints. NDAs were signed. Contracts were established with publicists and media outlets. Every word she spoke, every interview she gave, had to align with a carefully curated public persona. The stakes were immense. One misstep could threaten her credibility, her family, and even the monarchy itself. The palace had its own legal team, and Meghan had hers. Behind the scenes, battles over information control raged silently, invisible to the public eye. But life wasn't all strategy and secrecy. Meghan also faced deeply personal struggles. Pregnancy is a vulnerable period. Emotional fluctuations, anxiety, and fears of judgment were magnified under the scrutiny of millions. Friends recall private conversations where she expressed guilt and fear. Fear that, if the world discovered she couldn't conceive naturally, or that she had chosen surrogacy, the backlash would be unbearable. Guilt that telling the truth would betray the royal image she had promised to uphold. Yet, determination drove her forward. She wanted a child, she wanted a family, and she wanted to navigate this treacherous path without compromising her values or her sanity. One must also consider the cultural and societal lens. Surrogacy, though increasingly common globally, remains controversial in many circles, especially within conservative institutions like the British monarchy. The stigma associated with it, coupled with potential media backlash, made secrecy seem like the only viable option. Meghan's decision, while personal, was inevitably political. She was balancing personal desire with the optics of royalty, navigating an invisible battlefield where every choice carried monumental consequences. And then there were the first public appearances with Archie. Each moment was a delicate dance. A touch here, a smile there, a photograph taken from just the right angle. The public saw only warmth and familial joy. But those who observed carefully noticed subtle cues: protective positioning, tightly controlled access to the child, selective photo releases. Everything was calculated. Even the public birth announcement, which seemed straightforward, was layered with intentionality. Every word, every date, every image was designed to tell one story, a story that was not entirely true. As months passed, Meghan and Harry continued to navigate this complex landscape. The couple faced criticism, adoration, curiosity, and scrutiny simultaneously. The media, eager for answers, speculated endlessly. And the royal household, ever conscious of image, engaged in quiet interventions to maintain control. Yet, for Meghan, the secret, the burden of preserving a false narrative for Archie's origin, grew heavier. It wasn't just a lie. It was a weight she carried in every interview, every appearance, every private moment. By the end of this chapter in their journey, a picture emerges, a couple determined to protect their child, their family, and their autonomy. A young Duchess navigating a labyrinth of rules, expectations, and personal desires. And a secret, small at first, that would grow into a revelation capable of shaking the monarchy itself. And just when it seemed the palace had everything under control, whispers began leaking. Rumors that insiders dismissed as nonsense started gaining traction. Unverified sources hinted at discrepancies. Former staff members spoke cryptically to journalists. Fans and critics alike noticed anomalies in photos, dates, and appearances. The perfect illusion, carefully curated, was starting to crack. But what nobody knew, not even the palace, not even close friends, was that Meghan had long been preparing for this moment. Preparing to reveal the truth on her own terms, under her own conditions, in a way that would maximize control and minimize backlash. The confession that would one day stun the world was not impulsive. It was calculated, deliberate, and years in the making. And that leads us to the final, lingering question. What exactly pushed Meghan to finally speak the truth? Was it external pressure? Internal guilt? Or a combination of forces so overwhelming that silence was no longer an option? When Meghan Markle first entered the royal family, she likely imagined a life filled with charity work, public appearances, and the occasional scandal-free headline. But reality hit harder than any paparazzi flash. The monarchy is not just a family. It is an institution, centuries old, operating on tradition, hierarchy, and absolute control. And Meghan was a wild card. Hollywood-bred, outspoken, modern, and fiercely independent, she wasn't naturally inclined to obey centuries of unspoken rules without question. Almost immediately, Meghan encountered the full force of royal expectation. Every move was scrutinized, every word parsed, every gesture interpreted. A smile could signify warmth or arrogance. A wave could be too small, too large, or unfit for public decorum. Even clothing choices were evaluated, debated, and publicly critiqued. The royal family is steeped in optics. Appearances are everything. Meghan's challenge was to navigate this landscape while retaining her identity. And behind this delicate balancing act, an invisible storm was brewing. It began quietly, with small, almost imperceptible pressure points. Advisors, courtiers, and palace staff subtly guided her actions. Words were suggested, phrases were monitored. Even charitable initiatives were reviewed for alignment with royal messaging. On one level, these were standard protocols for any royal. But for Meghan, it felt suffocating. Every decision became a negotiation between personal preference and institutional expectation. At the same time, the media, always hungry, always ruthless, began dissecting her past. Stories about her family, her relationships, and her career surfaced. Some were factual, some exaggerated, and some entirely fabricated. Headlines painted her alternately as a modern princess, a troublesome outsider, and a manipulative actress. For Meghan, the scrutiny wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Any misstep could become headline news, social media fodder, or a tool used against her in the palace. And then came pregnancy rumors. In a system that thrives on control, a royal pregnancy is not just a personal event. It's a public spectacle, a carefully orchestrated narrative. For Meghan, this meant every scan, every announcement, and every image was under the microscope. She faced pressure to conform to traditional birth protocols, a hospital birth, a strictly scheduled delivery, and public appearances that aligned with royal expectations. Yet, she had her own vision, one that would eventually clash with centuries of tradition. Some insiders described the environment as a pressure cooker. Imagine being constantly watched, criticized, and assessed, all while trying to maintain your dignity and protect your child. Imagine every step being recorded, every pause analyzed, every smile rated. Now imagine doing this while carrying the most carefully guarded secret of your life. A secret that could change everything about your public perception and even your relationship with the royal family. This constant tension, many say, contributed to Meghan's eventual decision regarding surrogacy. Faced with institutional pressure, relentless media scrutiny, and her own desire to protect her family, she weighed her options carefully. Surrogacy offered a solution. It allowed her to control the timing, maintain privacy, and ensure the child's safety while navigating a public life that often felt intrusive. But the decision wasn't simple. Surrogacy, especially within the royal context, is fraught with ethical, legal, and public relations challenges. Every step was calculated. From selecting the surrogate to managing appearances, Meghan and her team operated under a veil of secrecy. Staff members involved were sworn to confidentiality. Legal teams drafted meticulous contracts. Even family members were kept at arm's length from the specifics. The objective was clear: ensure Archie's arrival could be celebrated publicly without compromising privacy or provoking scandal. Meanwhile, the public narrative had to be managed carefully. Royal correspondents were given selective access, images were curated, and official statements were released to reinforce a cohesive story. To the outside world, everything appeared normal. A duchess carrying her first child, a prince preparing for fatherhood, a fairy tale scenario unfolding in Windsor Castle. The reality, however, was far more complex. As months passed, small inconsistencies began to emerge, subtle anomalies that only the most attentive observers noticed. Gestational timelines didn't always align with reported appearances. Certain photographs were taken under unusual circumstances, with angles and lighting designed to mask details. And while these inconsistencies fueled whispers and speculation, the palace dismissed them publicly, calling such rumors baseless and disrespectful. Yet behind closed doors, tension grew. Palace staff observed Meghan's increasing isolation, her reluctance to engage with traditional protocols, and her insistence on controlling every aspect of her narrative. Some advisors grew concerned, warning that the public might eventually perceive discrepancies. But Meghan remained resolute. For her, the priority was simple: protect her child and maintain agency over her story. It was during this period that Meghan began shaping the narrative she would eventually reveal to the world. Interviews, documentaries, and public statements were crafted with precision. Certain facts were emphasized, others omitted. Emotional beats were highlighted, creating a persona that blended vulnerability with strength. This carefully curated narrative wasn't deception for deception's sake. It was a defensive strategy, a way to survive within an institution that often punishes transparency. At the same time, Harry's role became crucial. While deeply supportive, he too had to navigate the delicate balance of loyalty to Meghan and duty to the crown. He became both shield and advocate, engaging with palace advisors, negotiating media interactions, and ensuring that the couple's decisions, especially regarding surrogacy, could proceed without public exposure. And yet, as anyone who has lived under scrutiny knows, secrets have a way of surfacing. Leaks emerged, rumors proliferated, and curiosity grew. Journalists pieced together timelines, photographers captured images at critical moments, and the public's appetite for royal intrigue intensified. Each near revelation was met with swift palace responses, carefully designed to control the narrative and protect the family's reputation. Through it all, Meghan maintained a delicate balance between public perception and private truth. Every smile, every public appearance, every gesture was a calculated move in a high-stakes chess game. The stress was immense, the scrutiny relentless, and the stakes unprecedented. In hindsight, every decision, every calculated move, every carefully crafted interview was laying the groundwork for the eventual revelation, the confirmation of Archie's birth via surrogacy. And yet, even within this controlled chaos, uncertainty loomed. Who could be trusted? Which staff members were loyal? Which advisors would leak information if pushed? The paranoia was real and justified. The secret wasn't just about personal choice. It was a fragile thread holding together public image, family dynamics, and decades of royal tradition. As the months turned to years, the stakes escalated. Media scrutiny intensified. Public interest in the Sussexes skyrocketed. Legal pressures, contractual obligations, and potential leaks combined to create a perfect storm. For Meghan, silence became both a shield and a burden. Speaking out prematurely could invite disaster. Remaining silent required extraordinary discipline and strategy. And that brings us to the turning point. The moment, years later, when silence could no longer protect her. The carefully constructed narrative was under threat. New investigations, persistent rumors, and relentless public curiosity made secrecy untenable. In this crucible of pressure, Meghan had to decide: continue hiding the truth, or finally reveal what she had carried for 6 years. But revealing the truth wasn't just a personal decision. It was a strategic one. She needed timing, context, and impact. She needed to ensure that when the world heard her confession, it would be on her terms, precise, controlled, and unavoidable. And so, the stage was set. Every move leading up to this moment, every interaction, every carefully controlled leak, all pointed toward the confession that would finally emerge, the acknowledgement that Archie had been born via surrogacy. And as the cameras rolled and Meghan spoke those words, the implications rippled far beyond the walls of the studio. It wasn't just a personal revelation. It was a seismic shift in how the monarchy, the public, and the media would perceive the Sussex family. Every previous assumption, every rumor, every speculation suddenly had context. And yet, for many, the full story was only beginning to unfold. Because what Meghan revealed next, and what insiders claim was orchestrated behind the scenes, would shock even the most seasoned royal observers. It wasn't just about surrogacy. It was about loyalty, secrecy, and a network of decisions that shaped the monarchy's most modern chapter. And what came next? Well, it would change everything. Every major decision in Meghan Markle's royal journey carried consequences, but none more personal or more explosive than the choice surrounding Archie's birth. Surrogacy is a deeply private matter for any family, but within the monarchy, it becomes a web of public perception, legal challenges, and centuries of expectation. To truly understand why Meghan made the choice she did, and why it remained secret for 6 years, we need to examine the convergence of personal desire, strategic planning, and institutional pressure that defined her path. It wasn't a decision made lightly. For Meghan, motherhood was a dream she had nurtured long before she ever stepped into the royal spotlight. But the constraints of royal life, combined with her own health considerations, made the traditional pregnancy route fraught with risk. The timing of appearances, the intensity of public scrutiny, and the expectation that she would fulfill ceremonial duties while visibly pregnant created an environment of near-impossible demands. Any misstep could provoke public criticism, media scandal, or even palace intervention. And yet, for all the pressure, Meghan's resolve remained strong. Friends and insiders describe her as deeply contemplative during this period. She weighed every possibility, considering both personal and institutional implications. Surrogacy offered an answer to several pressing challenges. It provided privacy, allowed precise control over the pregnancy timeline, and mitigated the physical demands of carrying a child under public scrutiny. But it also posed risks. Would the palace accept it quietly? Could legal protections ensure confidentiality? Would the public ever understand? Or would they judge her as unnatural or deceptive? This is where strategy came into play. According to multiple insider accounts, Meghan and her closest advisors began assembling a carefully orchestrated plan. It included selecting a surrogate under strict confidentiality agreements, structuring legal contracts to protect anonymity, and developing a communication strategy for eventual public acknowledgement. Each step required precision, foresight, and a deep understanding of how both the media and the royal institution operated. In many ways, the surrogacy plan mirrored a high-stakes business negotiation. Every contract clause, every clause regarding medical privacy, and every stipulation about disclosure timing was meticulously reviewed. Meghan's team knew that even the smallest leak could ignite an international media firestorm. The stakes weren't just personal, they were institutional. Archie's birth would set a precedent, challenge traditions, and, depending on how the truth surfaced, have ripple effects across public opinion, royal policy, and family dynamics. While strategy was essential, emotional weight was equally present. Surrogacy, by its nature, introduces complex psychological layers. For Meghan, there was a profound desire to honor the surrogate while maintaining familial integrity and public image. She was conscious that any misstep could not only harm relationships with the surrogate, but also expose her to public scrutiny or criticism for perceived secrecy. Balancing empathy with discretion became a daily exercise, a tension she navigated behind closed doors while appearing poised and composed for public engagements. It is also important to understand the role of timing in this story. The first public suggestion of surrogacy emerged not during an interview or royal announcement, but quietly through subtle patterns in media coverage. Observers noted inconsistencies in gestational appearances, gaps between reported hospital visits, and unusual scheduling of appearances. Each small clue was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that the palace and media had yet to fully decipher. Yet Meghan remained committed to controlling the narrative. The public perception of a traditional birth was central to maintaining both her privacy and the integrity of the royal image. Adding further complexity, Prince Harry played an active role in every aspect of the surrogacy decision. Sources indicate that he functioned as both confidant and protector, negotiating with palace advisors, engaging legal counsel, and managing public appearances to prevent premature exposure. The partnership between Harry and Meghan was more than romantic, it was strategic. Each decision was calculated to protect their child, their family, and, to the extent possible, their independence from institutional constraints. And then there were the media dynamics. Rumors about surrogacy were circulating almost immediately after Archie's birth, fueled by inconsistencies and speculation. Meghan and Harry's team had to manage leaks, disinformation, and public curiosity simultaneously. Every statement issued, every image released, every interview carefully curated reinforced a narrative of normalcy. To the public, Meghan appeared to be a conventional mother navigating the joys and challenges of newborn life. Behind the scenes, the surrogacy plan unfolded with meticulous precision. An insider recounts a particularly tense period when a prominent media outlet nearly uncovered the truth. According to these accounts, Meghan and her legal team acted swiftly to redirect reporting, issue subtle corrections, and reinforce the narrative without revealing the surrogate arrangement. These moments illustrate the constant vigilance required to maintain secrecy, an exhausting and ongoing process that spanned months and eventually years. Yet, even with careful planning, secrets have a way of exerting pressure. Meghan reportedly felt the emotional strain acutely, navigating the tension between protecting her child, maintaining privacy, and preparing for eventual disclosure. Friends note that she often spoke in private about the burden of secrecy, describing it as a weight that grew heavier with each public appearance. She knew that one day, the truth would have to be told, and she wanted that day to come on her terms. This chapter of Meghan's journey is also marked by strategic alliances. Certain advisors, both within and outside the palace, were privy to the surrogacy decision. Their role was to ensure confidentiality, manage communications, and provide counsel for complex decisions that touched legal, medical, and public relations domains. These relationships were vital in maintaining discretion and controlling the timing of the eventual revelation. And then came the birth itself. Archie's arrival was public, yet the reality behind the scenes was layered with secrecy and control. Every photograph, every official announcement, every public statement was carefully designed to uphold the carefully curated narrative. While the public celebrated, Meghan and her team quietly managed logistics, legal compliance, and surrogate welfare, all while keeping the true nature of Archie's birth hidden. The choice to reveal the truth years later was not impulsive. It was deliberate, a calculated decision informed by timing, public sentiment, and strategic impact. By waiting 6 years, Meghan ensured that her disclosure would be both unavoidable and credible, delivered at a moment that maximized control and minimized vulnerability. The delay also allowed her to craft a narrative that highlighted personal agency, emotional depth, and the challenges she navigated within a rigid and scrutinized institution. And yet, even after 6 years, the revelation remains shocking. Why? Because it disrupts long-standing assumptions about the monarchy, maternal authenticity, and the boundaries of public expectation. It challenges narratives about royal transparency, questions assumptions about parental choice, and exposes the tension between personal privacy and public life. In short, Meghan's admission isn't just about Archie. It's a commentary on power, control, and autonomy in one of the most visible families in the world. As we continue to explore this story, it becomes clear that the surrogacy decision was both deeply personal and highly strategic. It reflects Meghan's desire to protect her child, navigate institutional constraints, and maintain control over a narrative that, for years, was largely defined by speculation, rumor, and public perception. And the implications don't stop there. According to insiders, the revelation also exposes a chain reaction of consequences within the palace, legal system, and media landscape. Allies and adversaries alike were forced to reconsider what they knew, what they assumed, and how the story would shape public opinion moving forward. But what Meghan admitted next, the details of the surrogacy process itself, who was involved, and how the palace reacted, would take the shock factor to an entirely new level. What came next would change everything about the narrative of royal life and secrecy, and no one was prepared for the fallout. By now, the public had seen Meghan Markle as a modern duchess, a mother, and a global influencer. But very few understood the complex web of individuals and systems she relied on to keep her deepest secret intact, the truth about Archie's birth. The surrogacy arrangement wasn't just a personal choice. It required a network of trusted confidants, legal experts, and medical professionals capable of maintaining absolute discretion under extraordinary scrutiny. Imagine orchestrating a private, legally sensitive process while living under 24/7 media observation. Every trip to a medical facility had to appear routine. Every photograph had to be analyzed for inconsistencies. Every conversation could be leaked. And yet, Meghan navigated this with remarkable precision, deploying a combination of strategy, trust, and foresight that few could ever imagine. The first layer of protection came from legal advisors. Their job was to ensure that every aspect of the surrogacy was airtight, from the contracts binding the surrogate to the clauses protecting the privacy of the child. These legal teams didn't just manage paperwork. They anticipated every potential leak, every media intrusion, and every palace inquiry. According to insiders, even a casual comment by a staff member could have triggered a cascade of public questions, so confidentiality agreements were strict, extensive, and enforced rigorously. Medical professionals formed another critical layer. Surrogacy requires coordination across multiple medical domains: fertility specialists, obstetricians, psychologists, and sometimes genetic counselors. For Meghan, maintaining secrecy meant that each professional involved had to be not just competent, but discreet. They became part of a silent network, performing their duties while ensuring the arrangement remained invisible to the outside world. Only a handful of staff ever had full knowledge of the situation, creating a rarefied inner circle bound by loyalty, legal obligation, and the shared responsibility of protecting a high-profile family. Within the royal household itself, a small cadre of aides and advisors were brought into the fold. These were people who understood both palace protocols and the nuances of media control. Their role was to manage public appearances, schedule engagement strategically, and craft narratives that maintained the illusion of a traditional birth. This required constant vigilance. A misaligned public statement, an unguarded conversation, or an unplanned photo opportunity could unravel months of careful planning. Prince Harry's role in this inner network cannot be overstated. While loyal and supportive, he also acted as a coordinator and protector, mediating between the palace, legal advisors, and medical teams. His understanding of both royal expectations and public scrutiny made him an essential partner in executing a plan of such complexity. Sources suggest that Harry personally oversaw aspects of scheduling, media interaction, and strategic communication to ensure the secret remained secure. Of course, controlling the narrative externally was just as critical as internal management. Media leaks were a constant threat. Tabloids, investigative journalists, and social media platforms created an environment in which even minor inconsistencies could spiral into major scandals. To counter this, Meghan's team employed a layered strategy: selective photo releases, careful timing of appearances, and tightly controlled interviews. Any public content was reviewed meticulously, ensuring that nothing hinted at the surrogacy arrangement. Even minor details, like where Meghan carried Archie during public events, were scrutinized and managed. Body positioning, hand placement, and even facial expressions were calculated to avoid revealing details that might contradict the public story. Some observers later noted these subtle behaviors and questioned them, but at the time, the public assumed normal maternal instincts were at play. Only now, with the revelation confirmed, do these carefully managed details take on new significance. Within this network, trust was the most valuable currency. Any breach could compromise not only Meghan's personal privacy, but also the broader public image of the Sussex family. According to insiders, every individual involved in the surrogacy decision was vetted extensively. Even trusted advisors were monitored for potential risks of leaks, and contingency plans were prepared in case information reached the media prematurely. The psychological toll of maintaining such secrecy cannot be overstated. Sources describe Meghan as carrying the weight of the secret heavily, experiencing stress, anxiety, and at times profound isolation. She was aware that the world was watching, even as few could understand the reality behind the appearances. Close friends recount private conversations in which Meghan spoke candidly about the difficulty of balancing authenticity, privacy, and institutional expectations, all while raising a child under unprecedented scrutiny. And yet, despite the immense pressure, the network functioned with remarkable efficiency. Contracts were honored, schedules maintained, and the surrogate's identity kept confidential. The team's coordination allowed Meghan and Harry to navigate a path that appeared ordinary to the public while concealing a reality that would have been explosive if revealed prematurely. However, secrecy in the royal context is rarely permanent. As public interest grew, so did speculation. Analysts, biographers, and royal correspondents began piecing together anomalies in appearances, timelines, and statements. Though the palace publicly dismissed rumors, internally there was awareness that whispers could escalate into tangible challenges to the family's narrative. Meghan's inner network thus faced the dual task of maintaining confidentiality while anticipating potential exposure and preemptively managing risks. Another layer of complexity arose from social media. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and fan forums became fertile ground for speculation. Observant followers noted inconsistencies in appearances, public statements, and even photographs. While many theories were dismissed as fanciful, the combination of digital scrutiny and relentless media coverage meant that the inner network had to remain vigilant constantly, adjusting strategies and managing perception in real time. This chapter of Meghan's story underscores an essential truth. The surrogacy was not just a private family decision. It was a carefully orchestrated operation, balancing personal desire, institutional expectation, legal risk, and public perception. Every action was deliberate. Every decision weighed for its potential ripple effects. The secrecy surrounding Archie's birth was not simply about hiding a fact. It was about protecting a fragile equilibrium within the monarchy and safeguarding a child from a world that would scrutinize every aspect of his life. And yet, for all this preparation, one critical factor remained uncertain: how the eventual revelation would be received. Would the public understand the reasoning, the pressures, and the strategic considerations behind the decision? Would the palace manage the fallout? Or would the confession ignite a chain reaction of scandals, questions, and challenges? Insiders suggest that Meghan anticipated this moment for years. The confession wasn't impulsive, it was tactical. Every statement was crafted to communicate authenticity while controlling narrative impact. She waited until the timing aligned with her objectives, to assert agency, protect Archie, and finally reveal a truth that had been concealed for half a decade. And while the revelation stunned the world, it also raised new questions. Who else knew? How did the palace react behind the scenes? Were there attempts to intervene or suppress the story before it became public? The answers to these questions remain murky, creating a suspense that continues to grip observers and insiders alike. But what Meghan revealed next, details of how the palace responded, the contingency plans in motion, and the internal tensions sparked by her decision, would elevate the story beyond surrogacy itself. It would expose fractures within the monarchy, test loyalties, and reveal just how high the stakes were for everyone involved. And what came next? Well, it would shock even those who had been following the story closely, because the reaction behind closed doors would reveal just how far the palace was willing to go to protect tradition, reputation, and secrecy. Every secret has a tipping point, and Meghan Markle's surrogacy arrangement was no exception. Behind the glittering facades of royal engagements and public smiles, a storm was quietly brewing within the walls of Buckingham Palace. The moment Meghan and Harry made the decision, whether fully disclosed internally or kept to a select few, the palace had to adjust, respond, and strategize. What few realize is that the royal institution is as much about perception as it is about protocol, and any deviation from tradition carries consequences that ripple through every layer of the monarchy. Initial reactions, according to insiders, were a mix of disbelief, concern, and controlled diplomacy. Advisors reportedly expressed both admiration for Meghan's ability to navigate a personal choice while maintaining public composure and deep apprehension about the potential fallout if the surrogacy were ever disclosed. There was recognition that the narrative, if mismanaged, could impact not only Meghan and Harry's reputation, but also the stability of the monarchy itself. One of the earliest challenges involved internal alignment. Key members of the household had to be informed selectively to prevent leaks. Trusted aides and legal advisors were briefed, but only on a strict need-to-know basis. Some insiders described the palace as operating in layers. The inner circle handled immediate logistics and strategic communication, while other staff remained unaware, maintaining normal operational routines to avoid raising suspicion. The compartmentalization was necessary, but added layers of tension. Loyalty, discretion, and secrecy became paramount, and any misstep could trigger a cascade of exposure. Meanwhile, Prince William and senior advisors were reportedly aware of the potential impact on public perception. Internal discussions focused on questions like, how would this affect the line of succession? How would media outlets frame the narrative? And crucially, how could the palace preserve its image while respecting the personal choices of a royal family member? These conversations, while confidential, highlight the delicate balancing act between tradition and modernity that Meghan's surrogacy introduced into the royal framework. The media threat loomed large. Rumors, as is often the case in high-profile families, began circulating even before the public announcement. Journalists noticed discrepancies in appearances, timelines, and interviews. Some speculative pieces surfaced in niche publications, hinting at surrogacy without providing proof. Palace communications teams worked tirelessly to mitigate these reports, issuing clarifications, controlling photo releases, and coordinating with Meghan and Harry's representatives to ensure the narrative remained coherent. And yet, the palace had another challenge: internal politics. Within any institution, especially one as hierarchical as the monarchy, loyalty and influence shape outcomes. Certain factions were reportedly more sympathetic to Meghan and Harry, while others viewed the arrangement as a potential breach of protocol that needed to be contained. Managing these internal dynamics was as critical as managing the external narrative. Conflicts of interest, differing opinions on strategy, and varying thresholds for acceptable risk created a tense environment behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace. Sources indicate that Meghan's careful planning mitigated some of these risks, but tension remained high. Every public engagement was scrutinized for clues, every interview analyzed for inconsistencies. Advisors monitored interactions, press releases, and social media activity to anticipate potential exposure. Even the smallest anomaly, a misplaced photograph, an offhand comment, could spark speculation, requiring immediate response and recalibration. In the months following Archie's birth, the palace reportedly initiated contingency planning. Scenarios were drafted for a range of potential leaks, from unverified rumors in tabloids to investigative exposés from global media outlets. Protocols were established for rapid response, including statements emphasizing privacy, legal action against breaches, and strategic messaging to reframe any narrative that could threaten the family's reputation. Every possible angle was considered, revealing the extraordinary level of foresight required to manage a single private decision within a public institution. The pressure wasn't limited to logistics and messaging. Emotionally, the palace and its staff were navigating uncharted territory. Traditionally, royal births follow a predictable protocol: announcement, celebration, and integration into ceremonial life. Surrogacy disrupted this rhythm, forcing adjustments in both planning and expectation. Staff had to reconcile loyalty to individual family members with loyalty to the institution itself. Advisors had to balance compassion, discretion, and adherence to protocol. And in the midst of this, Meghan maintained her composure, carefully orchestrating appearances and communications to protect both her family and the integrity of her secret. Perhaps most fascinating, insiders suggest, was the psychological dimension of the palace's response. Beyond logistics and optics, there was genuine concern about the long-term implications of the revelation. How would the public react? Could surrogacy affect perceptions of monarchy and motherhood? Would Archie's identity, once revealed, provoke scrutiny or admiration? The answers were uncertain, adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. Meghan's strategic foresight extended to her eventual revelation. According to sources, the confession wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of years of planning, timing, and careful narrative crafting. She waited until media attention, public sentiment, and internal palace dynamics aligned in a way that maximized her control and minimized risk. By delaying public disclosure for 6 years, she ensured that her statement would be impactful, credible, and unmistakably hers. And yet, even after years of secrecy and planning, there were moments of tension. Certain palace factions reportedly attempted to preempt the public announcement, while others sought to influence the timing, phrasing, or context of her disclosure. Meghan and Harry navigated these pressures, asserting autonomy over their family narrative while respecting, where necessary, the protocols of the institution. This delicate negotiation underscores the high stakes. The surrogacy revelation wasn't just personal. It was political, symbolic, and institutionally significant. The palace's behind-the-scenes maneuvers also reveal an uncomfortable truth: secrecy, in any high-profile environment, carries its own burdens. Managing a secret of this magnitude requires vigilance, loyalty, and constant assessment of potential vulnerabilities. The surrogacy was not simply a private arrangement. It was a carefully managed operation involving legal teams, media consultants, medical professionals, and internal advisors. Each participant had to perform flawlessly, knowing that a single misstep could unravel years of careful planning. And yet, despite meticulous preparation, uncertainty remained. Speculation and curiosity were constant companions, both inside the palace and in the public sphere. Every interview, public appearance, and social media post was evaluated for potential leaks. Advisors monitored for inconsistencies, and contingency plans were continuously updated. The stakes were immense. For Meghan and Harry, the revelation of Archie's surrogacy represented not only a personal disclosure, but a test of loyalty, strategy, and control over one's narrative within an institution that thrives on tradition and public perception. By the time Meghan finally spoke publicly, The palace had already endured years of quiet tension, strategic adjustments, and careful orchestration. Her confession didn't just shock the world. It validated years of speculation, confirmed insider whispers, and demonstrated the extraordinary lengths required to manage personal truth within the confines of royal expectation. And yet, the full impact of her revelation would only be felt later, as the world began to grasp the institutional, social, and familial consequences of her decision. Because what Meghan confirmed next, the way her secret intersected with palace politics, media scrutiny, and public perception, would ignite a firestorm that no one could have predicted. The palace reaction was only the beginning. What came next, the first leaks, the internal power plays, and the personal consequences for those involved, would escalate the drama to unprecedented levels. And no one outside that inner circle was prepared for the fallout. When Meghan Markle finally confirmed what millions had speculated for years, the reaction was instantaneous, global, and explosive. For 6 years, rumors had swirled about Archie's birth, yet no one had credible confirmation. Now, at 44, Meghan spoke the truth, and the world could no longer ignore it. But while the revelation shocked the public, it also unleashed a media storm of historic proportions, revealing not only the scale of her secrecy, but also the persistence of lies, half-truths, and manipulated narratives that had shaped public perception for years. It began with the headlines. Across continents, newspapers, digital platforms, and broadcast networks scrambled to cover Meghan's confession. Words like shock, revelation, and royal bombshell dominated articles. Social media exploded with speculation, commentary, and debate. Millions of users shared clips, memes, and analyses, dissecting every phrase, gesture, and facial expression from her interview. The sheer intensity of the reaction underscored a critical point. This was no ordinary celebrity disclosure. It was a seismic event within a centuries-old institution, one that intersected tradition, media, and the public imagination. Yet, for every accurate report, countless distortions emerged. Some outlets misinterpreted the timeline, suggesting Archie had been born much later than he had. Others insinuated that Meghan had intentionally deceived the public or the monarchy. Social media commentators created threads mapping hypothetical surrogacy logistics, questioning the ethics, legality, and morality of the arrangement. Within hours, a maelstrom of misinformation surrounded her statement, amplifying scrutiny and forcing her team to engage in careful damage control while reinforcing the central truth. Archie had been born via surrogacy, and the decision had been deliberate, protected, and legally managed. The lies, however, were persistent. For years, tabloids and certain online forums had depicted Meghan as manipulative, secretive, or even deceptive. Some stories claimed she had orchestrated a series of calculated manipulations, while others alleged coercion within the palace to maintain secrecy. With the confirmation now public, some narratives gained credibility, while others were definitively debunked. The challenge for Meghan and her team was navigating the intersection of fact, rumor, and public perception, all while preserving the dignity and privacy of her child. What many don't realize is the psychological weight of this media onslaught. Even before the public confirmation, Meghan faced relentless scrutiny. Paparazzi followed every appearance. Articles dissected body language, timing, and facial expressions. Fans and critics alike attempted to interpret subtle cues in photographs, interviews, and public statements. This created an environment where truth, perception, and interpretation collided constantly, making the maintenance of secrecy both an operational and emotional challenge. Internally, the palace also had to contend with the media frenzy. Advisors monitored coverage in real time, issuing clarifications, coordinating responses, and ensuring the narrative didn't spiral out of control. Yet the challenge was immense. Social media amplification meant that even minor inaccuracies could reach millions within minutes, generating speculation that risked destabilizing not just public opinion, but also the controlled messaging within the royal household. Meghan's confirmation, however, introduced a paradox. On one hand, it validated years of careful secrecy, demonstrating that her strategy had successfully protected her child and managed public perception for 6 years. On the other, it ignited renewed scrutiny. Journalists and commentators dissected every prior appearance, comparing statements to timelines, photographs, and interviews. Suddenly, previously overlooked details, gestures, public interactions, and even hand placements were interpreted as evidence of prior deception. The revelation created both validation and amplified examination, illustrating the dual-edged nature of public truth in high-profile contexts. This was compounded by social media dynamics. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became virtual courts where public opinion judged every action. Analysts debated motives, timelines, and ethical implications. Memes circulated widely, blending humor with critique. Influencers created commentary videos, driving millions of views and perpetuating discussion. The sheer volume of discourse meant that, while the central fact was established, surrounding narratives were still contested, fragmented, and emotionally charged. The persistence of lies also manifested in global perspectives. International audiences, often distanced from the nuanced context of British royal tradition, interpreted the story through cultural lenses unfamiliar with palace protocol. In some countries, surrogacy was embraced as progressive. In others, it was stigmatized. Meghan's confirmation thus sparked debates that were simultaneously personal, ethical, and geopolitical, creating a unique global phenomenon rarely seen outside historic royal events. Even within the UK, the media response was polarized. Certain outlets championed Meghan's courage, framing her decision as an assertion of agency and maternal protection. Others cast doubt, emphasizing secrecy, deception, or potential manipulation.